So when helping new families settle in Indonesia, what have been your best and worst experience so far?
I think most of my training is arranged through HR. And HR doesn't necessarily understand how emotional an international move can be.
Yeah.
Not just for the entire family. So one time I had a call from a company saying that the supporting spouse is struggling. Can you please come in and help the supporting spouse? So we had just started the training and the poor lady burst into tears. And my training's not that bad. It wasn't about my training, okay? Yeah. And so upon the discussion, what is wrong and whatever, she shared that they hadn't had a look-see trip. She didn't understand what they had committed to. The situation is far beyond what she was expecting, and she was just extremely unhappy. So through the discussion, we discovered, what is making you happy, what is making you unhappy, what do you need, how can we support you? And so I suggested, groups that she could join, how she could share her skill set, what she could become involved in. Mm-hmm. And so through that, I showed her something that she hadn't considered. And so, of course, I have to follow up on a case like that. And a couple weeks later, I did follow up with her. How are you doing? I was concerned about you. And I was so relieved to hear that she had felt much better, that she was getting involved in community. She was finding her friends. She was finding her support group. And that she felt that she was going to be okay in Indonesia. So that was one of my success stories that I would say that I thought that I wasn't sure if she hadn't got help, whether she would have continued the posting or not.
So, and this is so interesting, right? Because as much as you help expat through HR, the expat itself, mostly men, they will be in the office for 8-10 hours a day probably or more, right? Whilst the spouse then will have to be at home, and we know in Indonesia the spouse is not allowed to work with the supporting visa. How important it is, you think, that this spouse support as like in your job, in our business, right? How important it is for them to have spouse support?
I'm glad that more companies are realizing that the working spouse is going into a work situation that is similar to what they've left. So it's a familiar routine, it's a familiar commitment and job. But the supporting spouse comes in with a totally different situation.
Yeah.
And things that they were normally taking care of, the domestic chores, the childcare, the food prep or whatever, may have been turned over to domestic staff.
Yes.
And so they experience an identity crisis. Mm-hmm. What am I supposed to do now in Indonesia? And they become lost and unsure of what am I going to do for the period of the posting. And so it's helping them to find a commitment or find something that they can do while they're here, whether it be extend their studies, whether it be contribute to community groups, whether it should, could be extend their skills, whatever it be. But it's finding their new identity while they're here in Indonesia.
Can you share a success story of assisting a client, and how does it impact you personally and professionally?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had a request to come into a bank, and the bank had hired an expat. And the expat was a very highly recommended person. They had huge experience. They were known to get results. And so they came into Indonesia and they continued to lead and function the way that they had done in their home country. However, it was extremely upsetting to their staff because the approach was too direct, the criticism was too direct and everything. So HR had asked, can you please explain to him the better approach. Not that things didn't need to be changed, but it's how you deliver the message.
Yes.
And so through our discussions, I explained to him that you're probably making a lot of enemies within the Indonesian team because of your approach, which he was quite shocked about.
Yeah.
That, well, I thought I was just doing my job.
Yeah.
And you are, and that's what you're here for. But because you're in Indonesia, you need to adjust that approach.
Yeah.
And so I think both parties, both the hired expat as well as the bank, were appreciative that the situation became more bearable for both sides, and understood what would be a potential vast misunderstanding. And he expressed to me, well, why isn't my Indonesian team telling me this? And I explained to him, probably they're too polite to tell you otherwise. So sometimes it's nice to have an outside party to explain, to be the bridge, between the cultures.
And reflecting your time in Indonesia, right? You have been here over 3 decades. Do you have any regrets about your decision moving to this country?
For the most part, I must share that it's been an amazing time, an amazing life here. But the one big regret is that I don't get to see my family more.
Yeah.
So my children have an amazing relationship with my husband's side of the family, but I don't get to see my siblings that much. They don't know their cousins from that side as much. So I think any expat that lives overseas will experience that, and that's the one big drawback about living overseas.
So what do you think is the most challenging aspect of settling in Indonesia for an expatriate, him or her or the family in general? And how do you think these cultural training sessions that we are going to give to them are going to help them in settling their life here?
I think one of the biggest things that people face is that you're trying to change a behavior.
Yeah.
Not that when you come to Indonesia, you totally change. No, not at all. You bring your culture with you, but you have to adapt to the culture that you're in. There may be things that in your home country, it's normal. People accept that. It's not out of the ordinary. But when you do it here, it may be offensive, or people may not like it, or you may disturb others. So I think there's some things that you have to adjust because of the situation that you're in. It took me a long time to discover and understand what I do now.
Yeah.
But if I can help through a discussion, through a few hours spending with you, to avoid misunderstandings, to avoid mistakes, to avoid upsetting people, from either side, why wouldn't you take advantage of that accumulated knowledge and use it to your advantage to make your whole experience, not only for yourself, but for your entire family, more enjoyable while you're here? It's available to you. And so, in my opinion, it's something that all expats should consider doing. And I think it will be extremely helpful.
I think, to sum it up also, that we know most of the posting is not more than 3 or 4 years, right? So it's actually a short time. And this cultural training is actually a shortcut, right, for them, instead of learning by doing and experiencing and then, trying to get to know things and answers and how to do things right or correctly. With this training, they get a shortcut, couple of hours spent, and then a couple of days spent, and then they get the whole knowledge, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So even you talked about posting being 2 years, 3 years, which now is actually a longer posting. Sometimes we're meeting people that have 1 year.
Yes.
And even with the shorter training, I feel that's even more important because you don't have the luxury of time in order to learn all of this. And so rather than to, take 2 or 3 months to figure out which are your favorite restaurants, I can give you a list. In order, what should I do on the weekend? I can tell you right now. how should I behave in a negotiation? I can share that with you.
Yeah.
Why would you delay? Why would you wait on that when that information is already can be delivered to it now, today?
Yeah.
So, I think it's important. The shorter the time period you have, I think it becomes even more important.
Yeah. So, Ibu Jean, thank you so much for today. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your insights and your experience about, cultural integration in Indonesia. And we hope to see you again someday for our cultural program. And
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Vera. I mean, it's such a delight to get out of the pollution and hustle and bustle of Jakarta and experience natural Indonesia. What a setting, right?
Yes.
So thank you so much for the invite.
Yes, and
anytime.
We'll see you again soon.
For sure.